I've spoken before on this channel about something called the lonely chapter in terms of self-improvement. And just to give a brief summary, the lonely chapter is an awkward phase in self-improvement where you've outgrown your old friends, because you're not doing the same habits as them anymore. They're kind of still stuck in the bad habits. They don't really have any direction in their lives, and you guys are just on two separate paths now. But you're not quite developed enough to be friends with the people who you want to be friends with. They're more advanced in their lives. You don't really provide too much value in their lives, and you're kind of just stuck in this awkward phase where you're lonely. And in this video, I just want to speak about it in terms of our relationship with God. Now, as humans, this journey can get quite lonely at times, and as humans, we hate being lonely. And God did say in the Garden of Eden, it's not good for man to be alone. And we know that God definitely doesn't make any mistakes. So why does he allow us to be alone? Now, whether this loneliness is self-inflicted, right? Maybe you've pushed away the people God has sent into your life, and you just like, or maybe you just say I'm an introvert, you like staying inside, you don't go out there and like speak to people, you're not going to church to like look for fellowship or anything like that. Like, you've literally brought it upon yourself. Whether it's that, or maybe you've genuinely tried and you're just kind of lonely. You have people around you, but you still feel lonely, right? Like, you can feel really lonely in a crowded room. Whether it's self-inflicted or it's just happened, it's just been brought upon you, God will still use that loneliness, whether it's part of his plan for you, like you're meant to be in this lonely chapter, or you've kind of just brought it upon yourself. God will still use that to mold you into the person you're supposed to be. Now, the difficulty again with this loneliness is kind of just staying the course. I spoke about this like 2 videos ago, about the difficulty of like getting through to your breakthrough, is that it's just telling yourself to just remain the course, to maintain faith, because it gets really difficult. Like, this mind can be a real furnace sometimes. Like, things can just get all out of whack, and when you're outside looking in, if you were to just have it out of you, if you just like leave your body for a second and just look at yourself and be like, these are the facts of the situation. Why are you like so confused? Why are you feeling like, I just can't stay in this situation anymore? Like, sometimes it's as simple as, like for me, literally this year, like I've moved to a new city, and like I'm working on building my social life. But I remember like the first couple of weeks, Saturday, I didn't have anything social planned, and in my head, dude, there were some days I cried. I just had a breakdown, and I was like, what the hell? Like, you just moved to a new city, it takes some time. And lo and behold, a couple months later, I'm standing here and I'm like, yeah, it was sorted. Like, now, if I have a Saturday where I don't do anything, I'm grateful for it because it gives me like a chance to recover. And it's like, all I need to do is wait. But in the moment, bro, my mind was just racing. I was like, oh, I'm never gonna have friends. Oh, I can't deal with this again. I don't want to be lonely. But again, yeah, it's really just getting yourself to maintain and stay the course. And I spoke about this again in 2 videos ago, where I said that like Satan will twist the facts of the situation and feed you lies to get you to sort of just jump out. And the difficulty when you are in the period, whatever difficulty it is you're going through, is that just reminding yourself that, I am actually supposed to be here. Like, God has ordered my steps and I'm meant to be here. I think one thing that makes us want to like give up, or makes it difficult to be in the season, is that we believe we're not supposed to be going through it. And I think it's very important to remember that God is the author of tomorrow, and he has ordered your steps. And when you remember that, it gives you more calm, and it makes it more bearable. And I just got a list, just a list of things that I want to speak about that relate to this topic. And the first one was something I learned when I was listening to a sermon by Cliff Nettle, right, where he was speaking about how, I don't know what the topic of the sermon was, but one of the points he made in the sermon that really stuck with me was that sometimes when we reach the end of ourselves, or when we're at rock bottom, God is calling us. Like, he really wants us to just cry out to him, to be like, Lord, I am at the end of myself, please help. I beg, right? Like, when we get to the end of ourselves, sometimes, when you're in that pit, like Joseph or whatever it is, like, those are the periods where you really you hear God. Because sometimes when you're just chasing around things all this time, you don't really get to hear God's voice. But when you're really alone and forced to sit there and listen, like, you will listen to God. Like Jonah in the belly of the whale, right? Like, that's when he heard God, because he's like, bro, I'm in a whale now. And it's like, okay, now you hear God. Like, God is like, okay, now you will listen to me. And sometimes it's like God he'll either put you there to get you to listen to him if he thinks like it's necessary, or sometimes you just put yourself there, and again, he will still use that to speak to you and get you to cry out to him. And I think it's an important thing to realize that, like, yeah, we need to cry out to God when we are at the end of ourselves, because we're not supposed to be relying on ourselves, because we are finite, but God is infinite. And I think a second story that's really important to realize in this case is Job's story, right? I was at Alpha. There's this thing called Alpha. I don't know if you guys would know it, but it's basically this course where there's videos set up where the questions about God and like the faith of Christianity, and you get afterwards at our church, you go and you sit down, and like for us, we're young adults, so we sit down in our young adults groups. There's like men's groups, ladies groups, whatever it is. You get to sit there and actually like just ask questions. The leaders will prompt you like asking questions like, oh, what do you think faith is, or whatever it is, and you get to have a discussion, like a proper in-depth discussion. But anyways, I was there, and I mentioned the one time, I think it was, yeah, it was about like the Old Testament. I think that was the topic for that week, and they were speaking about how like some people believe like, oh, the Old Testament is irrelevant and whatever it was. And I guess one of the questions we were asked by the leader was just like, oh, what are some things about the Bible in general that you don't really understand or whatever it is. And for me, I was like, I don't really understand the story of Job. Like, I understand like from reading it that like at the end it was kind of just like God literally was like, bro, where were you when I made the moon and the stars, right? God was like, I am God, like you're not, like we cannot judge God because he's the ultimate judge, the ultimate and fair judge. And yeah, that's what I took away from the story, but it didn't really sit well with me. And then a couple of days later, I didn't meet up with like the leader, like he's my friend, and he just mentioned to me again like the story of Job. It was just one of the important points of that was that even though things get difficult, no matter what it is, you still cry out to God, right? Because Job wasn't perfect in that in his situation. Like it wasn't, I think that's one thing we kind of forget about Bible characters is we think like, oh, they were perfect, throughout. Like David, I mean, we all know about David and the story of Bathsheba, but they also just like, there were times when David was just running away because, he was being chased by all these kings who wanted to kill him, whatever it was, right? Like same thing with Job. Like it wasn't like, oh, he was just this perfect guy like the whole time. Like he is human, and he saw like what we saw. It was like, Lord, what the hell? Right? Like I've been nothing but good, and you've allowed this to happen to me. And God did ask, like he challenged, not even challenged God, but he did ask him. And there was a point where God was like, where were you when I created the moon and the stars, right? And the takeaway from that story wasn't just, oh, God is the ultimate judge and he's always fair and we always listen to him, but it was that Job, even though it got difficult and he was frustrated, in his frustration he never cursed God. He never ran away from God. In fact, he ran to God, right? He asked God, he ran to God with his questions, and he had genuine questions, the same questions I have. Like, why would you let that happen, right? And God is like, yeah, where were you when I created the moon and the stars, right? But God still spoke to other people. I forgot where it was he spoke to other people, but he still spoke about Job and be like, Job is still my good and faithful servant. Like he still encouraged other people to be like Job, because Job conducted himself appropriately. God was really happy with the way Job conducted himself in that situation. And that's the lesson of the story, basically. Even though it's difficult, it's important that we run with our troubles to God, not away from God. We don't curse God or anything like that. It's important that we still run to him and we remain faithful like Job was. And a third point I have written here is there's a song called Praise by Elevation Worship. And there's a line that gives me like goosebumps when I'm listening to it, and it just goes like, I'll praise when surrounded, right? And it's just like, oh, that picture is just so incredible, because like when we are surrounded and we feel like the enemy is coming through us, I think another like verse, a Bible verse that really ties in well with that is, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, right? I think that's how it ends. It's just important to realize that like even though like the situation does not look good, praise the Lord. And I think in that same song there's a line where it says, my praise is the shout that brings Jericho down, right? It's like just things like that. It's like even though it's difficult, when you are surrounded, just praise when surrounded, right? Like make sure, because he is still God, like he's still Alpha and Omega. Like he's the author of tomorrow. He has ordered your steps, and you will get out of it just fine. Like you can trust him because he's gotten you through other things before. He will get you through this, right? And it's important just remember that. Just praise when surrounded. The song is called Praise by Elevation Worship. It's an incredible song. And yeah, I think another thing I want to speak about is Paul, like the story of Paul. Like it's quite interesting. One thing I learned, I was watching this sermon by Pastor Andre Olivier. Um, he's the pastor of River Santon here in Santon, right in Joburg. And yeah, it's a sermon called Handling Divine Delays. And one of the things he spoke about was Paul, and how I didn't know about this, but like Paul wrote, I mean, he's written basically half of the New Testament. Paul wrote all of his books while he was in a divine delay, because Paul was, I think he was stuck in Athens. He was in prison, right? And he was on his way. He was on his way to Rome. He wanted to go to Rome to preach to the Romans, right? But there was a divine delay, and for all of us, like that would be very difficult to handle. It's like, I'm meant to be going to Rome. Like I've got this mission. Like, why am I in prison, God? Like what the hell, right? And while he was in Athens, in prison, he wrote half of the New Testament. All of these wonderful teachings we have all came from Paul while he was in a divine delay. And the importance there is that we should still be productive in our divine delay. We should still be faithful, right? We should still do God's will. And again, similar to what I was speaking about before, where sometimes we do just need to be alone, because God wants to use that, right, for his purpose, or to mold us into the people we're supposed to be, right? Paul would never have been able to write all of these teachings he had, in Romans, in Colossians, Philippians, Ephesians, Galatians, all of this. Like he wouldn't have been able to write all of this when he was running around preaching all the time, because that's what he was doing before. He was just running around preaching, and he was going to Rome to preach to the Romans, right? But he never would have gotten time to sit down and write all these wonderful teachings we have. And God gave him a divine delay, and instead of just moping around, like Paul went out and wrote half of the New Testament. And he just, bro, can you imagine the Bible without Paul's teachings? Like, it's incredible what can happen when we're faithful during our divine delays. And the last point I want to speak about, the last story that I can use to add to this, is the story of Adam, right? I mentioned earlier about how God said, we're not meant, it was not good for man to be alone, right? And I think this one particularly pertains to guys who are just waiting for you're waiting for your wife, basically, right? You're like, oh, we're not gonna get a girlfriend, God. Adam was lonely when he was in the garden, right? That's why God was like, it is not good for man to be alone. And then he brought him a helper, right? Now, the difference between Adam and probably most of you watching this video is that Adam was working on his purpose. God put him in the garden, and he said, okay, here you go, you've got this perfect garden. Your job is to tend to it, name all the animals and all of that, but your job is to make sure you're tending to the garden and you're maintaining it. And Adam was maintaining it. He was lonely, but he was maintaining it. He was working on his purpose. And that's when God was like, it is not good for man to be alone, and he brought him a helper. And God brought a helper into his situation to help with his purpose, because he was already working on his purpose, right? Now for you, if you're not working on your purpose, what helper is God going to bring into your life, right? You need to be working on your purpose, and you need to be faithful, like I said about Paul and Job and all that. You need to be working on your purpose while you wait, while you're lonely, basically. So yeah, I think that sums up everything I kind of know about this topic. Is that we should remain faithful, and we should be diligent, and we should be productive in our divine delays, and while we're alone and everything like that. But you guys let me know what you think of the topic in the comment section below. Make sure you subscribe to join the Self Improvement Brotherhood, and until next time, I'll see you guys.